It wasn't a choice. It was a physical reaction, like sneezing out a poison. I woke up rich, not comfortable rich. I woke up the kind of rich where you literally can't spend it fast enough, where the interest on the interest makes you feel like you're drowning in numbers. That was the problem, the sheer crushing weight of having everything and realizing everything meant absolutely nothing. Zero flavor. The panic started around 4 a.m. I was staring at the Rothko in the living room, the big, stupid red and orange one. That thing cost more than the annual budget of my hometown in Ohio, and it was just paint. I sold Thorntech 3 years ago. The valuation was $42 billion. My cut was 8 with a B. Since then, my life had been a carefully curated, utterly meaningless performance. I flew private to avoid looking at the commoners. I ate food prepared by chefs who thought truffles were a vegetable. I slept in houses I forgot I owned. One morning, the only thing I could think was, I am a battery, and this money is the current. If I unplug, what happens? I called Barry at 4:30 a.m. Barry Goldstein, my chief legal counsel, a man whose soul was 90% bespoke Italian wool and 10% terror of the IRS. Alex, Jesus Christ, it's still dark, he rasped, his voice thick with sleep and expensive whiskey. I need you in the office in an hour. No excuses. Bring the liquidation documents. All of them, I said. Silence stretched on the line, long enough to hear the faint hum of my high-security server racks downstairs. Liquidation? Alex, we just bought the Miami property. What are we liquidating? The staff bonus pool. Everything, Barry, the whole damn thing. Every stock, every bond, every piece of real estate that isn't nailed down by eminent domain. We are turning it into cold, hard cash, and then we are making that cash disappear. Barry coughed. A dry, professional cough designed to signal cardiac arrest without requiring an actual ambulance. Alex, you're talking about an 8-figure liquidation event. Maybe 10 figures. This isn't selling a yacht. This is destabilizing the secondary art market. I don't care about the art market, Barry. I care about the exit ramp. Alex, you're talking about an 8-figure liquidation event. Maybe 10 figures. This isn't selling a yacht. This is destabilizing the secondary art market. I don't care about the art market, Barry. I care about the exit ramp. I'm giving you a legal mandate. Execute it. Barry didn't hang up, but I could hear him pacing, the faint squeak of his $1,000 loafers on the polished marble of his kitchen. He was trying to calculate the tax penalties in his head. That was his comfort zone, the penalty box. You realize the sheer volume of assets, Alex. The tax implications alone could fund a small war. We can't just dump $400 million in municipal bonds on the market in a week. We'll be investigated. The IRS will flag every single transaction above $5,000. The SEC will assume insider trading on Thorntech shares, even if you haven't touched them in years. This looks like panic. It is panic, Barry, but the legal kind. We'll structure it. We'll take the hit. I want the money gone, but I don't want to go to jail. That's why you get paid what you do. I cut him off before he could launch into the whole lecture about fiduciary responsibilities. Start with the planes. I want them gone by Friday. The G700 and the Challenger, then the art, then the real estate. Use every broker, every auction house, every back channel you have. Move fast and don't haggle. Take the first credible offer within reason. There was a heavy sigh that sounded like the collapse of a very expensive sofa. Alex, this is the most insane thing I have ever heard, and I once defended a celebrity who tried to trademark the color beige. Welcome to my life, Barry. Now, clock in. The next 6 weeks were noise, pure financial noise. I didn't see the sales happening. I just saw the resulting movement on the spreadsheets. Barry assigned a small army of accountants, men who dressed like undertakers specializing in high-end funerals. They flew in from Zurich, London, and Delaware. They looked at me like I was a suicide patient who insisted on jumping off the roof of the bank. They were selling my identity, piece by expensive piece. The jets went first, snapped up by a mining magnate in Australia and a Russian oligarch who insisted on paying 60% of the price in physical gold bars, which caused 3 days of paperwork hell that Barry handled with the grim efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. I never once asked the price. I just signed the transfer documents. The moment the planes were gone, I felt a physical lightness, like the air pressure in the room had dropped 10 points. The art came next. I didn't even watch the auctions. The Rothko, the ridiculous red and orange square that had triggered this whole thing, went for an absurd amount. Good. Let someone else stare at it, wondering why their soul felt empty despite owning a masterpiece. The Basquiat, the Warhols, the silly little rodent statue I kept near the pool, all liquidated. The hardest part psychologically was the real estate. Selling stock is abstract. It's a number on a screen. Selling the compound in Aspen, the penthouse in Manhattan, the villa in Tuscany that requires contracts, inspections, and people walking through your private space, judging the texture of your custom Italian tiles. I walked through the Manhattan place one last time. 3,500 square feet of absolute silence and polished marble overlooking Central Park. It was designed for a person who hosted galas and gave inspirational TED Talks. I had used it maybe 4 months out of the year. I opened the floor-to-ceiling windows and listened to the sirens wail 17 stories below. No memories lived here, just investment. I paid off the staff generously. 6 months severance, full health benefits for a year. They thought I was having a mental breakdown, maybe retiring to a very secure island with no internet access. They didn't know I was retiring from existence itself. When the dust settled 6 weeks later, after every asset that wasn't tied down by some obscure generational trust or governmental regulation had been converted, the number staring back at us was sickening. $7.81 billion, the liquidation was mostly complete. The money sat in high-yield overnight accounts, waiting for what? To be reinvested? To buy the next big thing? That was the old game. The new game was simple. Get rid of it. This wasn't about philanthropy, understand? If I just donated it all to the Gates Foundation, I'd still be Alex Thorne, the guy who gave away his fortune. I'd still have the reputation, the board seats, the constant requests for interviews, the plaques, and the guilt. I wanted to erase the history, not rewrite it with a gold pen. I needed to ensure that this money, which had infected my life, could never return to me or even be traced back to me, guaranteeing my total anonymity and financial zero out. I spent a grueling month designing the structure. I didn't want a charity. Charities are organizations designed to perpetuate themselves. They have boards, they throw galas, they spend 30% on administration, and they give out awards. I wanted a furnace, a financial black hole that would burn through the principal until it was dust. I called it the Null Trust. Barry almost quit again when I explained the core principle: zero accountability to the founder. The trust would be managed by algorithmic triggers, not human emotion, overseen by 3 separate blind legal entities, one in Liechtenstein, one in Singapore, and one in a tiny island nation whose primary export was coconuts and questionable banking policies. "If the system works correctly, Alex," Barry stammered, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed silver hair, "you will have no legal standing to ever recall, track, or influence these funds again. They are gone. You are giving away complete control over $7.8 billion. Exactly, Barry, that's the point. It was a suicide note written in C++ and contract law. The Null Trust had 3 primary directives, 3 separate arms designed to ensure maximum speed and minimum traceability, structured to disperse the funds in ways that couldn't possibly be linked back to a single philanthropic agenda, thus preventing the dreaded Alex Thorne Foundation moniker. Arm 1, the UBI furnace. This was the most straightforward, designed for immediate, visible impact, but far from my own backyard. I didn't want political noise or think tanks studying my every move. I allocated $3 billion to this arm. The money was sent through a labyrinth of shell corporations and finally into specialized local credit unions in specific non-G7 countries, small towns in Eastern Europe, struggling agrarian communities in South America, and specific marginalized reservations in North America. The mandate was simple: direct universal basic income experiments. Monthly deposits large enough to make a difference, say $800 USD equivalent a month, sent directly to every registered resident, no strings attached for 5 years, until the funds allocated for that specific community were exhausted. No foundation logos, no press releases, just money appearing. I wanted to see what happened when the pressure of poverty was simply removed overnight. Arm 2, the Patent Liberation Engine. This was my tech background talking. I allocated $2 billion here. The directive: systematically acquire patents, specifically patents currently being suppressed by large corporations to protect their market dominance. This meant buying up medical technologies that would undercut big pharma, green energy solutions locked away by oil lobbies, and obscure agricultural tech that could make food production cheaper and more efficient. Once acquired, the trust's legal entities were mandated to immediately release them into the public domain, open source, globally. The goal was to cause systemic disruption, to force the established players to innovate or fail. This was targeted, controlled chaos, and it was engineered to run until the money allocated to this process was entirely spent on lawyers, acquisitions, and filing fees. Arm 3, the randomizer. This was the pure chaos element and the one that truly severed my ego from the money. I allocated the remaining $2.81 billion to this. The randomizer was a sophisticated, highly encrypted system that would, on a truly randomized basis, wire anywhere from $10,000 to $10 million to bank accounts worldwide. The system cross-referenced public records and banking data, legally acquired through third-party data brokers. Barry handled the ethics laundry to ensure the recipients were real people, not corporations, not politicians, just average individuals, completely anonymously, with zero explanation and no possibility of follow-up. Just a sudden shock of wealth dropped into a random life in Omaha, Nebraska, or a small village outside Lagos. I wanted to transfer the absurdity of my own sudden wealth, the pure, unearned randomness of $8 billion appearing in my life, to others. I wouldn't know who got it. I wouldn't know what they did with it. I would never receive a thank you note, a tax receipt, or even a headline. It was the purest distillation of my sickness, turned into a cure for someone else's mundane existence. Barry watched me sign the final vesting documents for the Null Trust. He didn't look terrified anymore. He just looked tired, like he was watching a long, brilliant career burn itself down to ash. "You understand, Alex," he said, his voice flat. "When these accounts are funded, your net worth for all intents and purposes becomes zero. We are talking about maybe $20 million left in liquid cash, set aside solely for your legal defense against the IRS, assuming they don't believe you're simply laundering money for a cartel. I understand. And the $20 million? I want it put into a diversified, low-risk fund. I don't want to touch it. That's my insurance. I want to build a life where $20 million is an emergency fund, not a starting line." I instructed him to transfer $5 million of that remaining 20 into a secure, anonymous bank account in my name, my new identity name, which we had been fabricating for the last month. "This is the last transaction, Barry, the final piece of the tether." He nodded, running the transfer. The numbers moved on the screen. The $7 to $81 billion was legally gone, tied up in the automated, irreversible directives of the Null Trust. My former self was now just a massive, decentralized financial event. I stood up from the boardroom table, the massive mahogany slab that had cost more than most people's retirement savings. I felt the air leave my lungs, not in panic, but in pure, exhilarating relief. "What now, Alex?" Barry asked. I took the small, worn backpack I had brought into the office, the same one I used in college. Inside there was a passport with a new name, Arthur Vance, a driver's license from Montana, $3,000 in cash, a cheap cell phone. Now, I said, zipping the bag closed, "I go find out who Arthur Vance is." I left the office, walking past the security desk and the assistants who were still frantically trying to wrap up the administrative chaos of the liquidation. I didn't take the elevator to the underground garage, where my driver was certainly waiting in the armored SUV. I took the normal elevator, the one that stopped on the 10th floor for the dental office, and the 7th floor for the financial consulting firm. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue, the sun was setting. The usual New York noise, horns shouting, the endless rumble of traffic, sounded different. It didn't sound like background noise to my fortress of wealth. It sounded like life. I walked 4 blocks south, bought a hot dog from a street vendor, and hailed a yellow cab. I gave the driver an address in Queens, a part of the city I had only ever seen from the window of the helicopter on the way to JFK. "First time in Astoria?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I was still wearing a $5,000 Italian suit, the last remnant of Alex Thorne. "Yeah," I replied, pulling the tie loose. "I think so. It's my first time anywhere." The plan for the next few months was aggressive and necessary. Arthur Vance couldn't look like Alex Thorne. I needed to burn the suit, the shoes, the haircut, and the posture. I needed to disappear into the noise, not stand out above it. My first priority was simple: find a room to rent, get a job that involved lifting things, and let the sheer physical labor erase the memory of balance sheets. I checked into a cheap motel in Astoria, paying cash for 3 nights. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarettes. It felt like the most honest transaction I'd made in 10 years. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the 2 items I had permitted myself to keep from my old life. One was a cheap plastic-cased digital watch I had worn constantly during the Thorne Tech startup years. I called it my starving artist watch. It kept perfect time, never needed charging, and cost $18. The second was a single physical photograph, a faded, slightly blurry snapshot of my college roommate, Dave, and me, standing outside our dorm room in Boston, covered in pizza grease and laughing about something stupid we'd just coded. Dave was the only person I still missed, the only person who knew me before the money. He still worked as a software engineer in San Jose. He didn't know I was gone. Not yet. I lay in the cheap motel bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the neighboring room, a TV blasting a sitcom laugh track, a woman talking loudly on the phone. It was messy, a human noise. It wasn't the sterile, temperature-controlled silence of the penthouse. I woke up the next morning, not to the discreet chime of my personal assistant's wake-up call, but to the harsh shriek of a garbage truck grinding metal outside my window. I looked at the ceiling, which had a faint water stain shaped vaguely like South America. I was broke, or at least I was functionally broke. I had $5 million of legal defense money in a trust, $3,000 in my pocket, and a fake name. I still had no idea what I was going to do next, but the crushing weight of the everything was gone. It had been transferred to a system that was now running itself, burning through billions of dollars in random acts of wealth distribution. The sheer scale of that ongoing financial event was its own shield. No one would ever believe it was one man's attempt to simply vanish. They'd assume it was a government black project or a massive cryptocurrency hack. My first task of the day was to find a Goodwill store. I needed to shed the Alex Thorne uniform. I found one 3 blocks away, tucked between a nail salon and a halal cart. I walked in wearing the custom-tailored Italian suit, looking like a man who had taken a severe wrong turn on his way to an important merger meeting. The suit alone was worth more than everything else in the store combined. I found a pair of slightly too large jeans, a dark blue hoodie with a faded college logo, not mine, and a pair of scuffed work boots. Total cost, $35.48. I paid cash. I went into the cramped, poorly lit changing room. I stripped off the Italian wool, the silk shirt, the expensive leather shoes. I balled them up and threw them in the donations bin. It felt like shedding armor. When I stepped out, Arthur Vance looked generic. He looked like a guy who might work loading trucks or managing inventory. He looked like exactly no one. The moment I stepped back onto the street in my new anonymous skin, I realized I needed to solve the most immediate, terrifying problem. I was accustomed to consuming the highest possible quality of everything, every single day. My body was a spoiled machine. If Arthur Vance was going to last, he needed to learn how to shop, cook, and live on maybe $50 a day. I walked into a grocery store. This was a nightmare. For the last decade, I had simply asked for food, and it appeared perfectly prepared, sourced from specialized farms in 3 different time zones. I hadn't pushed a shopping cart since 2005. I stood in the produce aisle staring at a mountain of bell peppers. Which ones were good? Were the organic ones really worth the extra dollar? The sheer volume of choice was paralyzing. I finally grabbed a handful of apples and a loaf of pre-sliced bread. I realized I didn't know how to boil water. Seriously, I hadn't had to. I got back to the motel room feeling ridiculous and utterly exposed. I sat there for an hour, staring at the bread. I knew how to design a decentralized AI architecture, manage a global logistics chain, and negotiate a $40 billion acquisition, but I couldn't figure out how to feed myself without a private chef. I had effectively engineered my own infancy. That night, I went online using the cheap phone and the motel's slow Wi-Fi. I wasn't checking the stock market or the news. I was watching YouTube tutorials on basic cooking, how to make scrambled eggs, and 10 cheap meals for beginners. I wasn't Alex Thorne, the genius billionaire. I was Arthur Vance, the guy trying not to set off the fire alarm while attempting to operate a microwave. The next few days were a blur of humiliating failures. I tried to find a job. I went to 3 construction sites looking for basic labor. I applied at a warehouse loading dock. Experience? The foreman at the warehouse asked. A huge guy named Hector who looked like he could bench press a small car. Tech management, I said, instantly realizing how stupid that sounded. Hector laughed, a deep rumbling sound. We move boxes, man, not data. You look like you just got lost on the way to a wedding. Come back when you've got calluses. I needed to solve the physical problem. I needed to look and feel like I'd done a day of honest work. The soft hands of Alex Thorne were a liability. I decided to start small. I bought a cheap pair of work gloves and found a small park nearby that looked neglected. I spent the afternoon hauling bags of leaves and pulling weeds just to feel the ache in my shoulders, the burn in my palms. It was the first time my body had been truly tired in years, not just chemically exhausted from too much travel and too little sleep. On the 4th day, I walked into a diner, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and terrible coffee, and ordered a plate of eggs and hash browns. I didn't care about the quality. I cared about the caloric input. The waitress, a woman named Carol with a name tag that was slightly crooked and a perpetual look of being mildly annoyed, brought my food. You look new around here, she said, refilling my coffee cup. I am, I replied, taking a bite of the dry toast. You looking for work? Billy down at the auto shop is hiring a general helper. Doesn't pay much, but you get to learn things. I looked up. Billy's auto shop, a place where I couldn't possibly use my old skills, where the only thing that mattered was mechanical aptitude and willingness to get grease under my fingernails. Where is it? I asked. She pointed out the window. 3 blocks east. Can't miss the busted neon sign. This was it. The first real step off the high wire. Not a system, not a contract, just a small, messy human opportunity. I finished my toast, left Carol a $20 tip, and walked out the door toward the busted neon sign. I needed calluses, and I needed them fast. The experiment wasn't about surviving, it was about living. And I realized I had to start at zero, right down to the engine oil. Billy's auto shop was 3 blocks of exhaust fumes and organized clutter. The sign, just like Carol had said, had a broken L and a flickering Y. It looked like a set piece for a very depressing movie about midlife regret. I pushed open the bay door, it rattled on its track, and stepped into the warm, oily air. The smell hit me like a brick. It wasn't the clean, sterile scent of a luxury car dealership or the faint aroma of the cedar I used to have shipped in from my walk-in closet. This was oil, rust, sweat, and cheap coffee. It was the scent of work, the kind of work that stains your clothes permanently. A man under a lifted pickup truck slid out on a creeper. He was maybe 50, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that looked permanently dipped in black ink. This was Billy. You the guy Carol sent over? He grunted, wiping his brow with a rag that was beyond salvation. Arthur Vance. Yes, sir. I tried to sound casual. I sounded like I was reading a corporate brief. Billy looked me up and down. My newly acquired Goodwill outfit, the slightly baggy jeans, the faded hoodie, was doing its best. But the look in my eyes still screamed, Harvard Business School, class of 2001. You look soft, Arthur, real soft. You ever touched a wrench before? I hesitated. I can learn quickly. I'm good with systems, logistics. Billy laughed, a harsh, dry sound. We ain't running Amazon Prime here, pal. We're tightening lug nuts before someone loses a tire on the BQE. Systems don't stop a blown gasket. He pointed toward a corner where tires were stacked higher than my head. See that pile? I need those sorted by rim size, checked for pressure, and stacked in the back storage unit. You got 2 hours. If you quit before lunch, I still owe you for the morning. If you make it through the day, you get $80 cash. Deal? $80? I used to tip the maitre d' $80 just to get the good table at Per Se. Deal, I said. He tossed me a pair of thick, cracked leather gloves that smelled faintly of old gasoline. Don't scratch the floor, Vance. It's the only thing clean around here. The next 8 hours were a physical assault. The first tire I lifted felt like it weighed 40 pounds. By the 10th, my arms were shaking so badly I had to drop it, and the rubber bounced off the concrete with a loud, embarrassing slap. Alex Thorne had spent 3 years training for marathons and hiring personal trainers who specialized in functional fitness, which meant I could lift perfectly weighted dumbbells in a temperature-controlled gym. Arthur Vance was lifting real-world weight, awkward, cold, and dirty. My back muscles, which had only ever been stressed by leaning forward over a $12,000 ergonomic desk, began to seize up. The grease and road dirt seeped through the cheap gloves and embedded themselves under my fingernails. I kept rubbing my hands together, trying to wipe the grime off my skin. It was impossible. It became part of me. Around noon, I made the mistake of trying to move a transmission housing. It was a greasy, jagged block of metal that looked deceptively manageable. I grunted, tried to hoist it onto a dolly, and immediately pulled something sharp and painful in my lower back. I saw stars. I had to lean against the wall, fighting the urge to vomit. Billy saw it all. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered reality. That's called the real world, Vance, he said, without looking up from the engine he was tearing apart. You push past the pain, or you go home. You got the money for a taxi? I didn't answer. I stood up straight, ignoring the dull, throbbing ache that was now centered right above my belt line. I went back to the tires, forcing myself to use my legs, not my back, remembering the perfect, useless form my gym coach had taught me. I finished the stacking. It took me 3 hours, not 2. When I finally took a break, sinking onto an overturned milk crate, I realized something astonishing. I was hungry. Not just time for my chef to bring the organic kale salad hungry. I was truly, physically depleted, the kind of hunger that sharpens the edges of the world. I ate the sad, pre-sliced bread and an apple, sitting right there on the dirty concrete floor. And it tasted better than any 6-course tasting menu I'd ever paid $500 for, because I had earned the calories. The afternoon was spent sweeping up metal shavings, sorting rusty tools, and running errands, fetching a specific size bolt from the inventory room, or holding a drop light steady for Billy. These tasks were mind-numbingly simple, requiring zero intellectual power, and yet they demanded total focus. If I let the drop light slip, Billy would lose a finger. The stakes were low, but they were immediate and physical. I wasn't thinking about the null trust. I wasn't optimizing asset allocation. I was just Arthur, trying not to screw up the difference between a half-inch and a 13-millimeter wrench. At 5 p.m., Billy tossed me 2 wrinkled 20s and a 40. You didn't quit, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. Show up tomorrow 8 a.m. if you can still walk. I held the $80. It was dirty, stained with engine oil, and felt heavier in my hand than the certified ledger confirming the $7.81 billion dispersal. This money was real. It represented 8 hours of pure, agonizing effort. I walked back to the motel room, the pain in my back radiating down my legs. I stripped off the work clothes, leaving them in a greasy pile by the door, and stood under the weak, lukewarm spray of the motel shower. The water didn't just wash off the dirt. It washed off the abstract, sterile existence of the last 10 years. I looked at my hands. The skin was red and raw beneath the grime, already developing blisters. Alex Thorne's hands had been perfect, manicured, suitable for shaking the hands of presidents and signing contracts. Arthur Vance's hands were ruined, and they felt right. Later, lying in bed, I accessed the secure bank account on the cheap phone. The balance was still north of $5 million, my emergency fund sitting untouched, guaranteeing my legal stability. But I looked at the $3,000 in cash I had brought with me. Now minus the $35 for the clothes, the $60 for the 3 nights at the motel, and the cost of the groceries. I was running down fast. I had earned back $80. The thought of the Null Trust crossed my mind, an astronomical phantom event happening far away. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, a struggling family just got $800 deposited into their account. No explanation. Somewhere, a critical pharmaceutical patent was being released to the world. And somewhere else, a single mother in Ohio just opened her banking app and found $50,000 waiting for her, dropped from the sky by a random algorithm. I had traded the power of knowing everything for the visceral relief of knowing nothing. The pain in my back was intense, but beneath it, I felt a deep, profound exhaustion that was almost spiritual. I was done being the battery. I was Arthur Vance, and tomorrow I had to earn another $80. If I didn't, I wouldn't eat. It was simple, terrifying, and utterly liberating. I closed my eyes, listening to the sitcom laugh track through the wall. I needed sleep, fast, because the only thing I knew for sure was that if I didn't show up at 8 a.m., Billy wouldn't call my chief legal counsel. He'd just hire the next guy who needed the work. That was the only market that mattered now. I had to fight for my spot on the floor. I had to survive this, and the first lesson was clear. I had to figure out how to stretch before I pulled another muscle. Tomorrow was going to be worse.